Gert Pettering, dear former EP president, I hope that he is present, Mr. Gilles Robes, dear Mr. Audi, Mr. Lamassoure, dear FMA members, the Jean Monnet professors, dear colleagues and guests, welcome to the third Librorum event for stimulating and unique discussion about the book Histoire, secrète de la Convention européenne by Alain Lamassoure, member of the Convention on the Future of Europe, among others. The conference in the Future of Europe has just been officially launched on Europe Day, 9th of May. I want to warmly welcome and thanks to our speakers, Mr. Alain Lamassoure, Mr. Jean-Pierre Audi, and President Hans-Gert Pöttering. Today's discussion is very timely, and I also want to welcome those connected to our discussion through the Facebook Live. Simultaneous interpretation is today available in English and French only on Zoom. In particular, I would like also to thank the Bureau of the EP in France for co-organizing the event. My name is Zofia Maze Kukovic. I came from Slovenia, from the country with a young democracy. For the last 2 years, my work in FMA Management Committee has been oriented in digital communication, and with the Secretariat, we made the difference which could help us today to be connected, having virtual events and visits despite the COVID-19 restriction. I have the honor to present the president of our association. Dr. Hans-Gert Pöttering is a German politician, CDU, and was the only member of the European Parliament who was served continuously from the first direct election with 35 years of uninterrupted membership. He held a number of leading positions in the European Parliament and European People's Party throughout his political career as a chairman of the European People's Party and European Parliament. And as a president, he initiated the House of European History, which was opened in Brussels in May 2017. He was president of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Today, he is the representative for European affairs on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Our president of the European Parliament, former member association, and president of the Reflection Group for the Future of EU. He has published many books on various issues of European affairs. His autobiography, Wir sind zu unserem Glück vereint, mein europäischer Weg, has been translated into several languages. Jean Monnet, an honorary professor emeritus at universities around the world. And now I will switch to the French language because we have our dear friends. Tout ce que je peux dire à propos du livre de Monsieur Lamassoure.
I can say about Mr. Lamassoure's book is that I read it with enthusiasm and with the memory of the biggest enlargement in the EU, which included my country. I met Mr. Lamassoure and Mr. Audi at the EPP political group during my mandate. I am honored to introduce Mr. Jean-Pierre Audi, who will be the chair of this meeting. He has degrees in economics, commercial law. He's an expert accountant. He has worked in local politics, but mostly in European politics. What he is most proud of is doing a 9-year mandate at the European Parliament. He was the chair of the French delegation, the EPP, for 4 years. Jean-Pierre says that Alain and himself have a commonality. They were at the head of the French delegation at the EPP, which had at the time members of parliament, and he always had the support of Alain. His biggest political defeat were the municipal elections. After his party won, he did not get elected as a mayor. Has his career affected his family life in a way or another? He thinks that his public activity contributed to his divorce in 2004. What type of European Union can he imagine in the future? If the Union doesn't disappear in 5 to 10 years, we will have to simplify the exclusive competencies of the EU. Except for some specialist journalists, the media do not promote European affairs because of a lack of interest. He created a consultancy company. He still works for the EPP and for his party, Les Républicains, and for his family while preparing his succession. Mr. Alain Lamassoure, as defined by his statements over his long political career, what is he most proud of? He was a mayor, and he created a project of trans-border municipality between France and Spain. As a minister, he was one of the organizers of the Paris Conference on European Cooperation and Security. During his long mandate as a European Member of Parliament, he said 2 years ago, what I am most proud of was to play a key part in creating Front Life, that 30 years later still funds all the EU's environmental policies. At the time, the Greens did not exist. I was green before the Greens. His biggest political defeat was nationally. It was his electoral defeat in the general election. He had to pay the price for an unpopular budget policy that he carried out. In Europe, it was the 2005 referendum where France rejected the proposal of constitutional treaty. He often said, when I played rugby and I lost a game, I always thought it was, if I thought it was the referee's fault, I would lose the next game. Alain says that Jean-Pierre and him have a common point, which was Nicolas Sarkozy's election to the presidency with an ambitious European program. His political career has affected his family life. He recognizes it. He says, my wife, who was a childhood friend since I was 10 years old, and with whom I have four children, left me because of politics, and this was the tragedy of my life. Many years later, I met my second wife during a pro-European demonstration. He thinks the French are not interested in European politics, or not enough. They are only interested in national politics. What type of European Union does he envisage in 2050? The same as today, enriched with what it misses today, a head and a budget. So a president of the Commission and a budget which is up to the responsibilities of the EU. What does Alain do right now? He is working on a major topic which is teaching history at schools. He's part of a think tank on teaching history in Europe. He's the member of the European Observatory on Teaching History at the Council of Europe. He is the chair of this observatory. He said, "Let's stop talking about peace," to the young. I'm sorry, I will talk about peace actually, because all generations before me did it. Thank you. Let me now give the floor to Mr. Audy and Mr. Lamassoure.
Merci beaucoup, chère Sophia.
Thank you very much, dear Sophia, for this very accurate introduction and for your perfect French. Thank you, Sophia, for what you're doing within our former members association. Thank you for your dedication, your passion, and your elegance. Our dear Hans-Gert, our chair and former president of the European Parliament, is doing a terrific job at the presidency of our association. I'd like to pay tribute to many participants, the former President Gilles Robles, who I can see here is present. Thank you, Isabelle Coustet, for the attention you pay to the work of the former members, because we are here at home. I would like to welcome all participants, particularly Nicolas Zorinda, president of the Wilfrid Martens Center for European Studies, and the DG of Reimagine Europe, Erika Walgren.
I welcome and like to greet the representatives of the members of the Congress of the United States of America. I have a brother, Nicolas, who lives in the US, in Seattle, and I have a strong affection for the American people. I remember when I was a member of the European Parliament, a remarkable speech that Joe Biden gave in plenary in May 2010, when he was vice president. He told us, "Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak, but it's also what it takes to sit down and listen." So thank you for being present to our event. En français. Merci à toutes et tous, particulièrement mes
Thanks
collègues.
to everyone, to my colleagues at the board, Erika, Miguel Angel, members of our association. Dear Alain, thank you very much. We are going to start our talks now. To me, you're a symbol of memory, experience, passion, honesty, and skill. Before asking you my questions and before having the participants ask you questions about your book, I would like to quote a remarkable text you recently wrote when President Giscard d'Estaing left us. You wrote, it was when he chaired the Convention of the Future of Europe that he showed how European he was. His style seduced and irritated some people, but his know-how was efficient. And you said, great men never die. So my first question, Alain, is, are they still great Europeans as President Giscard d'Estaing or Helmut Schmidt? Are they still great Europeans today? That's an interesting question. And before I answer, dear Jean-Pierre, I'd like to thank Elisabetta and President Pottering for their invitation. I'm deeply moved, just like Jean-Pierre, just like many of you, by this opportunity to see each other again. I'm frustrated because we have to see each other behind screens. I'm looking forward to the day when we can meet again in Brussels.
among participants, and I would want to start by welcoming them and express all my gratitude for their presence and how happy I am to watch them again, see them again. Paul Rubich, Joan Colom, Alois Peterle, Jan Mulder, Manuel Porto, Miguel Angel Martinez, Françoise Grostet, Laurent Brinkhorst, Mechtild Allman, and a lot of and some more. And in a different category, but as close to my heart, José Luis Pacheco, who has special relationship with the organization of the former members association, and Bruno Boissier. So, ta question, Jean-Louis.
So about your question, are they great Europeans today? Yes, of course they are. Of course, we always tend to idealize people from the past. Valéry Giscard d'Estaing is no longer part of current European affairs. For about 20 years, he was part of history already. Yesterday in France, we celebrated the anniversary of his successor's election to the French presidency, François Mitterrand. I'm convinced that today, in France and Germany, at the European Commission, we have heads of states, or even at the head of the European foreign policy, and with other commissioners. We have great Europeans. And most of all, since the crisis and with the succession of crises we've experienced in Europe for about 10 years, the Lehman Brothers financial crisis, the Eurozone crisis, the Syrian refugee crisis in 2015, the terrorism crisis that has affected thousands of lives in Europe, and more recently, of course, the pandemic and the economic crisis that followed. I'm convinced that Europe, strangely, has a Zoom effect, benefits from a Zoom effect. Let me explain. Thanks to the pandemic, we found out about Zoom, or about platforms such as the one we are using today that enable remote conferences, remote contacts, and that enable us to be in touch without geographical limitations, and that enrich our relations, professional, political, academic relations, as we are doing today, and as something we could not do without what I call Zoom. Zoom had existed for 20 years, but we barely used it. The EU had existed, and since the Lisbon Treaty, since 2009, the Lisbon Treaty, which was the fruit of the European Convention that we are going to discuss. Europe was already in existence. It had formidable capabilities that were underused. Thanks to the crisis, we found out about it, about its underused capabilities, and about the fact that it could act. What is happening right now is very interesting, because beyond the personalities that can move Europe forward, in the public opinion, that Europe, the sentiment towards Europe is changing.
On l'aimait pas beaucoup. Elle n'était pas.
So in the past, Europe was not identified with people. It seemed out of reach of people's lives. But now, today, European citizens have understood that whenever there is a major problem, whether a risk or an opportunity, if Europe is not in the first line, we are powerless. It doesn't mean that Europe must act without taking into account member states. It is a family of states that we try and improve constantly, but facing a crisis, the pandemic, Chinese hegemony, Russian efforts, if we don't have Europe on the first line, whatever we can do at the national level will be powerless. This is what I call the Zoom effect. So I'm quite optimistic about the consequences of the present situation. Thank you, Alain. I would like to greet Antonello Falomi, who chairs the Italian Association of Former Members. And we work also through him with the Association of the Council of Europe. Alain, in your book, there are really very interesting parts about experiences of federation in Germany, for instance, and you made comparisons as compared to the work of the convention. It could have been a stage towards federation, and the failure with the referenda, we have the impression that the people have wanted to hold that process. So this is my question. Following all the work that you have described so well, why did the process fail? We mustn't get it wrong. It is a very good question. We mustn't get it wrong about what failed. I listened with great sadness many comments which were made in the last few days for the launching of the conference on the future of Europe. We had the comments from some journalists who said we are not going to make the same mistake as for the convention. No, the convention was a historical achievement. What failed, what didn't go well, is not the convention itself. In France, we say we judge a tree on the basis of its fruit. The product was excellent. What failed was the campaign to sell that product. And the president of the French Republic at the time, and I'm sorry to say so, as Jean-Pierre was very close to him, he didn't manage to sell that product. He made the mistake of organizing a referendum when he could have had it adopted very easily at the National Assembly, the French Parliament. And there's a tradition in France which was set up by de Gaulle himself, who introduced the possibility of having a referendum. The constitution was, the referendum was a way to ask the opinion of citizens, leaving aside the parliament and even sometimes to take decisions against the parliament. De Gaulle needed to do that because he had to use that process for the independence of Algeria. The parliament was against it, the people was for it, and he used the referendum to check that he had the support of the French people. He lost one referendum, on an important subject, which is decentralization, but he resigned 5 minutes after getting the results. Unfortunately, President Chirac organized a referendum at the end of his term. He was not popular, and so a majority of French people who wanted to express their lack of support for Chirac voted against. But if Jacques Chirac had resigned 5 minutes later as de Gaulle, no one would have said it's a failure. When de Gaulle said resign, no one said that it was a failure of decentralization. It was a personal failure of the president, General de Gaulle, and then President Chirac. But it is not the interpretation which was given about it at the time, and certainly not by President Chirac, who didn't resign. And so everyone thought, well, Europe, French people don't want it. And this referendum, which was confirmed 2 days later on by another referendum with a different political meaning in the Netherlands, this opened a period of Euro-skepticism. It was a background of skepticism in Europe. And in France, it only stopped 4 years ago with the election of President Macron. For the first time in the history of French politics, during the campaign of 2017, a candidate made a campaign with the European flag, with the European anthem, and was elected with an ambitious European program in spite of this Euroscepticism. So, Sofiane, thank you for your introduction. You mentioned the election of President Sarkozy in 2007, which shows that the product which came out of the convention was very good. The analysis of President Sarkozy was right. It's not Europe which was questioned. It's not the content of the convention itself, but Europe needed the new competences, the new decision-making process with the role of the European Parliament, with the President, with a real common security policy for 26, 27 members. Europe needed what had been defined in the draft treaty, but we had to have a different approach. We no longer speak about constitution, and it is more difficult to read the text now. The treaty, which became the Lisbon Treaty, was adopted by the French Parliament, including by those who had campaigned to refuse the constitution. So let's not get it wrong. What failed is not the product since the Lisbon Treaty, since 2009, even though it's has not been used enough, but now with the Zoom effect, it enabled Europe to face this succession of crises without precedent. What failed, of course, it's the after-sale service, as it were. So thank you very much, Alain. I would like to ask a last question, and I'll ask the participants to prepare their questions. You can raise your hands for a question, and I'll give the floor to President Pottering. But I have a last question, Alain. to establish a link between the Convention on the Future of Europe and the present approach launched by the institutions, inspired by the French president. This conference on the future of Europe, President Pottering created a high-level group to build with a very important academic support the position of former members so as to tap on their experience. Alain, you accepted to be part of that high-level group with different high-level persons. So what do you think about the future in Europe on the basis with your rich experience of what you write in your book, what you experience, because you were an MEP for many years after the convention? And I suggest that after you answer, President Pottering may take the floor, and then we'll have questions from the participants. Because time is pressing on, and I think that some people are really looking forward to asking some questions. So, in short, how do you envisage the link between the past and the future? So, first of all, let's go back to the convention, which is the subject of my book and which is the starting point of our exchange. I've just stressed the results of the convention, but it couldn't be done again today. Not because the method is bad, it is the only method to make progress. And in the Lisbon Treaty, it is even said that if we want to reform in depth, not just some superficial change, but if we do want to have an in-depth change, the decision-making process, the institutions, we have the legal obligation to gather another convention. So I beg you not to do it. No one is trying, except from time to time the most federalist members of the parliament in the Constitutional Affairs Committee. So why not? Well, one of the main reasons that the convention succeeded, it was first of all chaired by President Giscard d'Estaing, which was an impossible task. And we have, let me stress, that it took 1 year to agree on how to chair it. We needed a chair. We needed also to have clear expectations of the member states and public opinion. And in 2002-2003, Europe was very optimistic. A few months before, it had achieved the euro. Jean-Pierre, we have some American friends with us, and I remember that in 1998, I was invited to make a series of conferences in American universities to present the euro, and people laughed at me. The Nobel Prize for Economics had just been awarded to Mondale, who said that different countries couldn't have the same currency. In 2002, that was done. The economic situation was good, so there was a euro optimism at the time. Today, we are rather in a period of Euroscepticism, and the Zoom effect hasn't brought yet all the benefits. This optimism was so widespread that amongst the 200 members, we had less than 10 Eurosceptics who felt so isolated, so embarrassed in such a huge assembly of European minds that they dare not oppose the final consensus. They just made a press release to say we are not part of that consensus. They could have said, well, we are against, there is no consensus. Today, if we were to have a convention, national parliaments and even the European Parliament will send us a proportion of xenophobic and so it would be very difficult to have a convention on the future of Europe today. So how can I see the future? What is lacking today? Sophia mentioned it earlier on. I'm going to enrich what Sophia said. I think three things are missing. First of all, we need a leader, a Mr. or a Mrs. Europe. I mentioned President Macron, and I'm very critical of his position in 2017 when he said not to take into account the European results for the appointment of the President of the Commission. I admire President Ursula von der Leyen. I support her in the way that I can do, but she doesn't have any democratic legitimacy, and when she's facing problems, which is inevitable, well, European citizens don't have an empathy for her difficulty, whereas when it is your head of state which is facing problems, it is sad, not just for him, but for everyone in the country. Even if you haven't voted for that leader, you feel somewhat humiliated. So it is essential, and it is one of the aims of the group set up with Hans Gert, that out of this conference we get an agreement so that next time in 2024 Europe will have the equivalent of a prime minister, that is to say a person chosen which can represent a coalition or get the support of a coalition. So European parties will make a campaign to designate their candidate, as we do in national politics, so it will be much more interesting. There'll be a greater participation. It was quite important, and the person who will be elected not just because of a behind closed doors agreement, in exchange for that so-and-so would be elected in a different international organization. No, so media will invite the candidates, the media will talk about them. We need a head, a leader, and then we need a budget. And there is some good news. José Luis Pacheco and others have for years tried to improve the European budget, find new resources for the budget to borrow money. So we try to make progress.
And then suddenly, with
the pressure exerted,
pressure conditions, all the locks that completely blocked the European budget suddenly disappeared. The budget was multiplied by
750 millions. These are
750
Euro bonds,
billion,
as it were, without being
which are
called that
Euro
way.
bonds without the name. They need to be paid back to reinsure
So
financial
we,
markets. And there's a European calendar for this.
prepare a
The
time
European
scale, and
Parliament
I
does it,
really,
and I pay tribute to its efforts.
congratulate the European
So-
Parliament for this work.
This is ongoing. And we'll have to work on this with the high-level group with Sigurd Perdering. At the beginning, this was only linked to the crisis. And the states agreed to this on the condition that it was a one-shot. So to make sure it is not a one-shot, and that the same budget can, after funding the national budget, because this amount now finances national budgets, it should in the future finance European budgets, what we need. The European Council, with the ministers and the European Parliament, should decide to do this, to put in the necessary resources. And there's one last thing missing in the project. The great project of the 21st century Europe, the one I ask for in all my speeches in universities and schools, is to create a great Europe-Africa partnership. The European 21st century would be played in our ability to reach out to Africa and to be as creative, as imaginative, as audacious as the founding fathers were when they invented the political building of Europe, to create a partnership. Everything remains to be invented, a partnership between Europe and Africa, European Union, African Union, subcomponents, whatever. I don't know how we will do this yet, but it is clear that Africa is the future of the world. It is where the greatest potential, human potential, lies. At the same time, it is a continent of failed states. It is where there's the most danger, the most risk for Africans themselves and for us, their neighbors, plus all the bad historical memories there are between both sides of the Mediterranean. So this is where Europe is played. Of course, there's also Russia, the superpowers, the US, China, what's happening in India. But this Africa is the priority. And this is where we need to use all the know-how we have acquired in reconciliation between peoples, between European peoples, to invent a respectful partnership for Europe, African partners, giving up all forms of neo-colonialism. And we know there are many of them. So a partnership between equals that remains to be invented. It's a wonderful project. And I think that with a leader who can be a woman, of course, a democratically elected leader who would represent Europe with a budget and with a great project, then there's a great future for Europe. Thank you, Alain. President Postering, would you agree to say a few words after Alain's speech? Please.
Voilà, premièrement, je voudrais féliciter
Yes, first of all, I would like to congratulate
Alain Lamassoure pour son
Alain
livre,
Lamassoure
c'est
for his
vraiment
book.
très remarquable.
It's a remarkable
Et
book.
deuxièmement, je voudrais remercier
Then I would like to
Alain
thank
pour la bonne
Alain
coopération que nous avons
for
eue
the great
au Parlement
cooperation
européen
we've had
et
at the
maintenant
European
dans notre,
Parliament and now in our think tank.
So far, we had a little technical problem, cher Jean-Pierre, et je te remercie aussi pour la modération.
I would also like to thank you for
we could not understand
the moderation.
what has changed now since 30 seconds. Now we can understand the translator in English, but we could not understand it before. So I had the French original, but my French is not perfect, so I could not understand everything. But I would like to make, nobody is perfect. Nobody is perfect. I know I'm not perfect. But I want to refer to what Alain has said concerning the referendum. And he mentioned Jacques Chirac and he mentioned Charles de Gaulle. And if I remember correctly, Charles de Gaulle once has said, if you have a referendum, the people give an answer to all questions you have not asked. And I think this great statement, Charles de Gaulle, even if I prefer Robert Schuman, but he was a great politician, he was a great statesman, and he was right. And I think the good contribution of Nicolas Sarkozy was then when he had his election campaign, and our French friends remember quite well, like Alain and Jean-Pierre. Nicolas Sarkozy said in his election campaign, we want a new treaty. It should be shorter. I told him, this cannot happen. You will not have a shorter treaty. But I will give this treaty to the Senate and to the l'Assemblée nationale. And I think this was a great decision, so that in the presidency of Nicolas Sarkozy, he finally succeeded to get the approval of the two parliaments. And I think this was right. And I think for us, as members or former members of parliament, it's of course important to listen to the people, of course. But in the end, at least this is my position, I believe in the representative system. That means that the people elect their representatives, ladies and gentlemen, and then the politicians have to decide. So this is the representative system I really believe in. And I did not understand exactly, Jean-Pierre, what I should say now, but I want just make a short remark concerning our reflection group. And I'm very happy that Alain Lamassoure is part of it. And we have 9 members, so all parties. I don't know whether we have an Italian representative here now. We have from Italy one person that gives 3 legitimacies. It's Monica Frassoni. She's Italian, she's a lady, and she's a green. So she is almost, I would not say perfect, but it's good to have her. And we have a lady, I see Doris Pack and many ladies here. We have a lady from Hungary, our former colleague Zita Gurmai, and we have a lady from Poland, that is Józefa Gabrowska, and we have even a prime minister who is a lady, and she stays in our reflection group. That is Kaja Kallas from Estonia. She joined when we formed our reflection group, and she accepted to stay. And then we have as members 2 former presidents of parliament, Pat Cox and Enrique Baron Crespo. So I hope I have mentioned all of them. So we have had our first meeting, and we will have a next meeting, and then we discuss the real substance, what we should achieve with this conference on the future of Europe. And my last remark in this context now is, we should not exclude treaty changes. Maybe that the pandemic, which we had now as coronavirus, makes it necessary to give new competences to the European Union. I don't know yet the answer, but we have to think about it. So the treaty changes should not be excluded.
Thank you, President. A question by Bruno Brassier, Director of the International Center for European Training. Bruno.
Merci Jean-Pierre Audy,
Thank you, Jean-Pierre Audy.
Je suis très heureux de retrouver
Delighted
Alain Lamassoure
to see Alain Lamassoure
avec
again,
qui j'ai collaboré en
with whom I
parallèle à
have
la
worked
Convention européenne avec un intergroupe fédéraliste pour la
in
Constitution
a federalist
européenne
intergroup
qui
for a
l'a
European
présidé.
Constitution
Je voudrais
that he chaired.
permettre de laisser tomber une question
I would like to
que j'avais posée par écrit
ask a question that I asked
au moment de mon inscription,
as a written question when I signed up.
réagir plutôt à ce que je viens d'entendre de la bouche d'Alain.
Actually, I would like to change my question to react to what Alain just said.
Une question sur, disons, la méthode
Question about
de la convention et surtout
the convention's method
la finalisation du processus. Tout le monde est
and the
conscient, je
conclusion of the
pense, que
process.
les référendums nationaux qui sont
I think everyone is aware
constitutionnels et
that national
obligatoires dans certains
referenda
pays
that are mandatory in some countries
sont une épée de Damoclès sur tout résultat
are a Damocles sword
de consultation populaire sur un texte aussi bon soit-il. Et donc, je pense qu'il ne faut pas attendre pour
whatever
ce
the
combat.
quality of the
On
law.
l'avait fait pour une constitution européenne. Malheureusement, nous n'en sommes pas encore là. Mais sur le
We should not
référendum,
expect a
qui
European
devrait être
constitution.
un
We are not there
référendum
yet, but
européen,
the
pas
referendum should be
une
a
addition de
European
référendums
referendum.
nationaux
It should
ou
not
une
be an addition
combinaison
of
ou une
national
combinaison de
referenda,
référendums nationaux
a
et
combination of
de
national referenda
ratification par les parlements. Donc,
and parliament's
je pense qu'il ne
ratifications.
faut pas reléguer ça au calendrier grec.
I
Il faut
think
s'en
we
occuper
should
maintenant,
not
bien
postpone
sûr,
this. We
avec
should
une
do
double
this now.
majorité qu'il faudrait proposer
Alain talked about a double majority
pour éviter des vétos
in order to avoid vetoes.
Mais c'est ambitieux, mais je
countries.
pense qu'il faut déjà
It's
commencer à travailler
ambitious, but
là-dessus.
I think we should start working on it already.
Deuxième point, je termine là-dessus,
Second
sur
point, and I will end
la
with this,
vision future
on
qu'a
a
proposée
vision,
Alain,
a future vision.
Bien
for
évidemment, les gros pas qui ont été faits pour les ressources propres grâce à la
course,
crise Covid,
the
bien évidemment, c'est essentiel.
budget,
Je crois que
because of the
là,
COVID crisis, is essential.
dans ce Parlement européen, a beaucoup
This European Parliament
à tirer cette question vers le haut et avec beaucoup d'ambition.
the question has been raised very ambitiously.
Je suis un peu surpris
I'm quite surprised to hear Alain
un axe géopolitique, certes
talk about
très
a
important,
geopolitical
mais qui
approach, which is of course very important, but
j'aimerais savoir comment il
I
voit
would
la
like to know
paraissait être la priorité de Madame von der Leyen, qui est arrivée. C'était
how
pas
he sees this,
la
because
meilleure
it
façon
seems
d'arriver
it was the
là où elle est
priority of
aujourd'hui,
Mrs.
mais
von
qui
der
a
Leyen,
quelque chose de très ambitieux, de très
who
courageux.
has been very ambitious, very brave
Sur le Green Deal.
with the Green Deal. So I'd like to hear his position
Ça me
on the Green
paraît
Deal.
suffisamment important
I think it is
pour balancer
important
cette
enough.
question géopolitique Europe-Afrique. Je voudrais que tu,
I think
Alain,
it's
s'il te plaît,
even more important than the
évalue
geopolitical
l'un par
approach
rapport à
of
l'autre.
Europe and Africa. Alain, I would like for you to compare both topics. Alain? Microphone, please. I would like to welcome other friends who have arrived now. President Jose Maria Gil Robles. I would like to welcome Lord Palm. We said he might be present today. So Bruno, first of all, a comment on the project for a European referendum. You might remember that we suggested it at the European Convention. It was in the treaty, planning for a number of decisions and the ratification of the treaty itself to be done by a European referendum, a referendum that would take place on the same day in all countries. If we had to ratify the European Constitutional Treaty with the same referendum in all countries, they would not have been the same answers. It was a referendum that committed all Europe, and nobody would want it to be outside of it. You might remember that this was turned down And the problem now is that in many countries, we would need unanimous ratification, but also we would need to change national constitutions. So it's quite difficult. But, you know, I fully agree, because I suggested this common referendum at the European Convention. There's no contradiction between the European Green Deal and the Europe-Africa relationship. This is not going to happen overnight or over 5 years. It's a process that will be as long as European construction, which is still not over 70 years later. But it is a huge project. It's different from the Green Deal. It's not in contradiction with it. Personally speaking, I'm not very comfortable with the Green Deal. This is not the topic of tonight, but for me, it is not true that the number one problem for the European Union today is the fight against climate change. Yes, it is a major topic. Without Europe, it would not have happened. And Europe has played an important part. The rest of the world has taken the topic seriously. The Americans took it seriously under Obama. They left under Trump, but they are coming back. The Chinese cannot avoid the topic either. But this is not the only issue. Not at all. There are even more serious threats than climate change, more urgent threats on us, on Europe, starting with nuclear and military proliferation, a major issue on which important progress was made and that we need to maintain, thanks to Europe, which played a key part to stop the Iranian nuclear program. And we are happy to see the Americans coming back to this. And as long as we do not dare to talk about this, nobody dares to talk about this, there's a problem that has solution, the problem of fossil fuels prices. We need to make the price of fuel deterrent. We had the experience in the 1970s with 2 oil crises. The price of fuel was multiplied by 4 overnight. If the price of oil today was $200 a barrel, I can tell you it would be different. I experienced this. In the winter, there was 10 degrees Celsius in the offices and we worked in our coats. At some point, we stopped working because it was 7 degrees Celsius in the Parliament's building. It's a topic that no government, no institution dared to approach. And personally speaking, as long as we have not talked about this issue, which is the most efficient way to solve the problem, we'll make commitments, we will dedicate X% to X. We will make so-called green investments. I'm not against the Green Deal. It's not in contradiction with what I said about Europe and Africa, but I think we are talking about it too much compared to other dangers, other threats, which are just as serious. We are disarmed in front of the pandemic because we were looking elsewhere. And now I think we should talk about Brexit as well. Let me come back to Africa, to the failed states. These are countries whose population is going to treble over 20 years. It's as if the French population was going to become 200 million inhabitants over 20 years. There will be a lot of tragedies happening in these countries. We are very close to these countries, so there will be consequences at home. Let's plan for it in advance. Let's get organized in advance to make sure that this relationship is as an asset for reconciliation, for shared development, for the spread of democracy, of good practices, etc., rather than being victims and then waiting for other unplanned events to happen. But this is a 20 to 30-year vision. Climate change, in a way, is short-termism.
Thank you, Alain. Monica Baldi will take the floor. Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Thank you, Zofia. And thank you, President Hans-Gert Pöttering. Thank you very much. I would like to greet Antonello Fanelli and our colleague. He celebrated his 100th anniversary, so best wishes. Mr. Lamassoure, I fully agree with what you've said, but you said that Europe was a family of states. I'm somewhat worried about the problems caused by COVID in Italy and also the migration problem which we know in Italy. So I agree we need to have a strong leader in 2024. But how should Europe act now at the present? I'm very sorry, Monica, but I couldn't hear you. Your sound was lost. So, how should Europe act on the basis of solidarity? Italy was left on its own last year. We had a lot of problems, as you know. Is that clear now? Monica is right. And we could work on that issue in the high-level group led by Hans-Gert Pöttering. We need to reinvent this solidarity between European states, between European citizens. Solidarity is not just a theoretical or philosophical concept. You can measure solidarity. You can measure solidarity on the basis of a budget. What is the part of the national wealth which is being redistributed from the rich to the poor, from those in good health to those who are sick, from those who are active to the seniors? So you can measure this solidarity, and it is measured at the national level. The European budget, if we were to measure that solidarity, is really negligible. In France, taxes represent 46% of the national wealth of the GNP. In average in Europe, it is about 40%. So when a Frenchman gets 100 euros, he pays 46 euros of tax, and just €1 is for European solidarity. So it is quite a weak solidarity. If we could increase the European budget on a sustainable basis, it would increase. But Monica is right to say the solidarity we expect has other forms than the financial form. Whenever one country, and you see the tail of my cat on the screen, the cat is the only animal you can't master, so I'm sorry for such intrusions. So what Europeans need from the Union, from their partners, is indeed to take into account the difficulties, the crises that can happen. It is clear that northern countries, France included, have not shown solidarity to the first countries concerned by migrations because of geography. Italy, Greece, Malta, from time to time, Spain, Gibraltar, the Canary Islands, but it could be also, as we saw with the Russian attitude, with thousands of Afghan people coming to the border between Finland and Russia. And so we, the countries which are not in the first line, we have the duty to support countries in the first line, all the more so that migrants dream of settling in Northern Europe. So a common migration policy should be a priority for the European Union. We've talked a lot about the Green Deal, but there's also that human policy which is important. Policy to master migrations on a regular basis with people who could freely set up in the European Union should be a priority, but there are other issues. In foreign policy, for instance, I cannot understand that in Western Europe and perhaps in Southern Europe, we do not understand that for the Poland or in Riga or in Estonia, the Russian threat is real. It is a military threat, it is a real threat. And a few days ago we saw these military exercises at the border of Ukraine. And at the same time, such countries, the Baltic states, for instance, have to understand that for us in the first line in this difficult relationship with the Islamic world, we also need the solidarity of our partners to face these issues. When we'll understand that this solidarity is obvious and the citizens understand that much better than a diplomat in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so it will be easier then to have a European foreign policy. So indeed, Monica, we have to put flesh on that solidarity. To build Europe on the basis of subsidiarity is good, but it has its limits, and today the word solidarity should be at the core of our priorities. Thank you, Alain. I have now 4 questions. I suggest, unless I have another request, to put an end to the questions. Alain told me that he was that you could raise your questions in writing and he would offer to provide an answer, a written answer, in the next few days. So thank you very much for that, Alain. Before giving the floor to our former colleague Benitza, I would like to greet Enrique Baron Crespo, who chaired the association before Hans Gert, and who was also president. Thank you very much, Enrique, for being there. I remember that I really loved working with you as an MEP, and I'm very glad that you are part of our discussion. Mr. Benitzer has the floor. You wanted to raise a question? So I'm just a user. Dear Alain, it was a great pleasure to work with you in the Committee of Economic Affairs, and I could really appreciate your brilliant French. We take part to the future conference on the future of the European Union, and we are involved in the online platform. And I have two questions. Why is the conference planned for 1 year instead of 2 years? We need intensive debates for that. Second question, do you think that there is a chance of having a new convention after the conference? Dear Thomas, thank you very much. I have understood that Jean-Pierre wants to group questions, to take them together. Is that so? No, I don't think so, because we have 3 questions and the interpreters have agreed to give us 10 minutes extra. But if you prefer, we can group the questions. That might be better, perhaps. So we can work until 7:25. We need to allow for 2 minutes to close the meeting for Sophia. So I suggest Peter Len, Miguel Ander, and Mrs. Lichtenberger can ask their questions. But anyhow, let's group the questions. It's quicker. Miguel Angel, your question? Your mic is not on, Miguel. Can you switch on your mic, please? Can you hear me? Yes. First of all, let me say how happy I am to have this initiative, Librorum, and
il faut quand même faire référence au Brexit, parce que le Brexit est un élément important de cet échec dans un très grand pays, de cet échec pour l'ensemble du projet, même si j'avoue que j'ai l'impression qu'on a réglé raisonnablement bien le problème du Brexit, les conséquences du Brexit, au moins les plus immédiates. Mais j'étais très content d'entendre Alain parler de l'euro comme une conquête essentielle et que l'opinion publique n'osait pas espérer. Pourtant, elle a eu lieu. Mais il y a autre chose dont on n'a pas parlé et qui est quand même, à mon avis, énorme. C'est-à-dire, on ne peut pas oublier que pendant le temps de l'échec, il y a eu une dizaine d'États nationaux.
There was a dozen national states that achieved the enlargement, which was unthinkable. Millions and millions of men and women in European countries became members of the European Union. This cannot be ignored. The euro is a wonderful achievement, and the enlargement is a wonderful achievement as well, even though sometimes we might wonder whether some of these countries really understood what the enlargement entailed. Some of the countries who got into Europe became members of the European Union without realizing that it meant accepting the rule of law and the defense of human rights. And in this respect, I'd like to thank Alain Lamassoure from the bottom of my heart for his intervention, for his efforts, and for his book, of course. Thank you, Miguel Angel, who is a member of our board at the FMA. One last question. Eva Lichtenberger and Alain for the answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm happy to see you all again. Those I already knew from the convention time when I was a backbencher, but I must say, Mr. Lamassoure's contributions were always very interesting. So I'm really happy to read the book. Well, I have one question coming back to the conference for the future of Europe. What do you think about the way in which civil society will be included, and what do you expect from that? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, dear friends. So, as promised, I turn to English to facilitate things if interpreters have to leave. Well, dear Thomas Mann, why this Conference of the Future of Europe is limited to 1 year? Well, for a simple reason. The reason is simple, actually. The original idea was expressed for the first time at least 2 years ago by French President Macron. And the timetable was devised by Macron for Europe, but also for Macron. What was his idea? Well, to start discussing among ourselves being not only governments, national parliaments, institutions, but also civil society, dear Eva, and as mentioned very rightly and smartly by Alois Peterle, to discuss on untold problem, untold issue, non-debated issues between Western Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe. We have heard from our past different culture, different tradition. We have drawn different lessons from history, from our recent past, particularly from the bloody and tragic 20th century. And we have never exchanged among ourselves. We do it a bit through academic conferences in the framework of think tanks, but never in depth. And so this project to understand each other better, it was the original idea and a right one. And of course, launching a wide-ranging debate, taking on board as many different categories of citizen lobbies, NGOs, etc., as possible, with a view to drawing concrete, possibly institutional, legal, and financial consequences. It took time, so 2 or 3 years were not well meant, but this idea was not well expressed by President Macron. It was not well received by the European Commission. The Commission had just approved the Green Deal project. So they see this proposal as a rival to their own program, an agenda which had been approved both by the Council and Parliament. And most partners, EU partners of the French president were not enthusiastic about the project. So it took time. The Parliament was interested, but the Parliament engaged, it's my view from outside, in useless turf war between institutions to decide who would preside, who would chair the whole process. So then the pandemic, of course the pandemic. Then we lost 1 year. And President Macron, being intent on an end next spring, because it will be time for his election campaign, re-election campaign at the head of the French Republic, and well, no other governments being interested by the scheme, so okay for just 1 year. But dear Thomas, you are right, of course. If we are serious, if we expect some results from such an exercise, particularly in this time of lockdown everywhere in Europe, and probably that will last until next fall, next autumn. Well, it will be better to extend this time frame, and it will be extended. It will be with a midterm review to enable President Macron's campaign again on the European agenda and building on some proposals coming from the conference, etc. But if we mean business, we will need 1 or more years. So another question from Thomas. what is my expectation about the possibility of a new European Convention. As I mentioned earlier in my introduction, now is not the time. We must be sure that public opinion and governments are mature and ready to engage in such a process. If it is premature, if we launch it too soon, the risk is a backlash. And the risk is to play in the hands and to play the game of all the Eurosceptics everywhere. It will be too simple for them to be present, to appear. That will be invited in all media and all, including social media, to express their hate against Europe, etc. And of course, they are bound to be more eloquent than our federalist friends. So possibly in 2 or 3 years' time, after, in the wake, in the aftermath of the crisis and the recovery and the success, hopefully, of the European Recovery Plan, we will see. And provided that late this year in Germany and next year in France are elected new, strongly pro-European leaders backed by a wide pro-European majority in their respective parliaments. If that is not the case, let's forget it for a couple of years. I fully agree with Alois Peterle to say that one of the subjects beyond financial issues, budget issues, institutional issues we have already mentioned, the basic values. What are the European basic values? What is rule of law? What is the rule of law? What does that mean? Solidarity, subsidiarity, up to where, etc. On all of these fundamental principles, first, we have not updated our own thought, our own philosophy, and it requires updating. The independence between the judiciary, the legislative, the executive, how involve the citizens better. And then I answer to Eva, what are my expectations about the participation of civil societies? My expectations are poor, because we are still looking for the best way to involve citizens. And as Hans-Gert, my personal conviction is that the best way is representative democracy, making representative democracy live again, revive. It's in crisis everywhere. And all these attempts to nominate some citizens, although to invite them to self-nominate. For instance, in France, you may know that 1 or 2 years ago, the French president decided that there would be a convention of citizens interested by environmental issues to make proposals for an ambitious environmental policy in France. So there were people who nominated themselves among militants of environment, and of course the proposals they made were very extremist, and they were unaccountable to anybody. So it's very easy for unaccountable people to propose whatever, what nonsense, whatever. Now, in the conference of the future of Europe, there is another method, the gathering of samples of citizens picked up according to statistical methods to be representative of the various categories of the population. But which categories? It's arbitrarily decided. And of course, we will invite them to make proposals, but their proposals won't commit anybody. And again, they won't be accountable to anybody. So if you want to hear and to listen to people really representing the various categories of a population and elected by the citizens themselves and accountable to these citizens, well, it's democracy, it's parliamentary democracy. But what's true is that it's not enough. Parliamentary democracy now functions poorly almost everywhere for some specific reasons in some countries, but also for common reasons everywhere. So it's a matter we should discuss among ourselves. But I expect little from so-called civil societies, and there will be this effect from civil societies and for all the fora, all the internet contributions to social media, etc., there will be millions of proposals. And it's the best way for a central power, particularly in dictatorships, to pick out cherry picking among millions, and of course to retain what is interesting for him. So the involvement of citizens, more involvement, is a major issue, a major stake for the future of our democracies at national level, at European level, at worldwide level. The global warming, it's a global issue, and we need to find ways to involve and make responsible ordinary citizens, but the ways are difficult to find. And historically, it is impossible. It has been impossible so far in a top-down approach. It's impossible for the king to make the people speak, apart if the people knows that when he speaks, and if he speaks up and high, he may topple the king. But it's parliamentary democracy or presidential democracy. So, but on the other side, from the bottom up, riots, outbreaks, uprisings, revolutions, the people take the floor and take the power. Of course, we don't want this kind of possible violence, but we must find ways from the top, but rather from the bottom, through political parties, through trade unions, through NGOs, through think tanks, through all the inventivity, creativity of the younger generation to foster a huge bottom-up movement. Okay, and last thing about my expectations. If I were president of the French Republic or Bundeskanzler, after my election or re-election, my proposal would be, now is the time among the European peoples and among our nations to pose the question of confidence among ourselves. Who is ready to do what together and how far? Clearly, we need now a common foreign and defense policy, not only the coordination today, but a real, a genuine common foreign policy. Now is the time to have one single representative in the board of the International Monetary Fund and in the Security Council in the United Nations. Who is ready to take part to this common foreign policy? Likewise, we referred to migration earlier. Now is the time for a common migration policy, not only on refugees, but also on migration, on legal, on work migration, common. As long as it's not common, it is helpless and pointless. Now is the time for a common environmental policy, really common, etc. There are half a dozen. Now is the time for a common health policy. Clearly, obviously, who is ready? Who is ready? And on the basis of the answer, then organize in a first stage in the framework of the Lisbon Treaty through an enhanced cooperation, or several different enhanced cooperation, but one single would be better. And then as a second stage, in a new treaty. You see the idea. That's why my expectation would be to make a long story short. My first expectation would be for this Conference on the Future of Europe, exchange on our common values, on our different expectations, and to try to find better ways to involve citizens and listen to citizens, organized or non-organized, and as a final goal on the decision-making power and on institutions, to bring together all those governments, countries ready to go further, faster, in an enhanced cooperation with a view to gradually enlarge this community to the whole Europe, but preventing the French from this French mistake, consisting in defining from Paris who are the other countries willing to and able to take part to this enhanced cooperation. It's up to every country to say whether they wish to be in or to stay out. And a last way, a smile to Miguel Ángel about Brexit. The best analysis and quotation about Brexit was our former colleague Jean-Louis Bourlange's one. Jean-Louis, you remember him, is now unfortunately member of the French National Assembly. He has been demoted from the European Parliament to the French National Assembly. And when the Brexit won the referendum in 2016, his comment was, well, the Brits have always wanted to have one foot in and one foot out. And now it will be the reverse. It's the case. Okay, dear friend, thank you. Thank you. as promised, I will try to answer to the written questions. Unfortunately, I am too talkative and too happy to meet you again, and so I speak too much. Not all questions have been answered, but I am of course available to answer in writing and to keep in touch and be in touch again with all of you.
Jean-Pierre.
Thank you very much, Alain, for this contribution. C'est passionnant, vraiment merci. And I will very thank les interprètes. Merci beaucoup aux interprètes qui ont accepté un temps.
Thank you to the interpreters as well.
Elisabetta and Lisette. And I will give the floor to Sophia for 2 minutes or
okay.
for a conclusive remark. And Alain write on his book, Europe is a new continent to discover and above all to invent. So Sophia, conclusion, please.
Thank you.
Many thanks to all of you.
I would just say that this debate today was actually about the future of Europe and on the basis of all of your experience from the past. That was, from my point of view, the best thing. Now we are living in a new time, in the new technologies. We are gathering like this, working from the distance, have a meeting from a distance. And I hope that we could empower EU inside and outside, EU inside and outside of the world. I would like to thank you to our president, Mr. Petering, to Mr. Lamassoure, to his presentation of the book and especially for his view. Thank you to Mr. Odi for excellent moderation of this event. To Mr. José Maria Gil Roberts, to Baron Crespo, to Madame Doris Pack, Monica Baldi, Brigitte Langenhaden, Teresa Riviera, Mr. Angelo Martinez, to all of you, dear members of FMA, for your discussion and participation. Thanks to the members of the US Congress, to the professors of the Jean Monnet, thanks to the Bureau, once again, of the EP in France for organizing the event, and thank you for our secretariat for their excellent work. J'aimerais conclure cette présentation parce que Alain déclarait à la fin de son mandat.
To conclude, as Alain said at the end of his term, 25 years after he started in the parliament, everything has been said. In 1999, I entered a forum limited to one side of Europe, and in the world that I'm going to live, we have a real European Parliament with a legislative capacity. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Buonanotte.